Happy Monday morning to you. I'm going to take you guys on a ride today through a situation that I dealt with several years ago at the college, and this is fun, and it's kind of packed in here. I'm going to try to get through it quick enough so that you won't run out of time. And I know some of these things can be pretty long whenever I get too involved with that. In order to get a good launch on a repair, somebody's got to ask the right questions. Whoever's the service writer is, whoever wrote the ticket, whether it's the shop owner, whether, whoever, somebody has got to have that first contact with the customer, FaceTime with them, talk to them about what it is they want fixed. If it's a troubleshooting situation, they're going to have to tell you, when does it happen? Does it happen cold, hot? In other words, this is the questions that need to be asked by the person writing the ticket. After a hot soak, bumpy roads. Whenever somebody's writing a lot of tickets, they have to really put a ton of energy into asking the right questions, unless somebody just comes in and wants an oil change or something. Is it just one or two speeds, or is it just a certain load, only when backing up or going forward? Have other hands been working on it, and what were they trying to fix or replace? In other words, I like to know, did it happen all of a sudden, or did it come on gradually? Sometimes that's a useful piece of information. Sometimes you got to talk to the customer. If your employer will let you do it, sometimes you got to talk to the customer yourself, so you'll know which questions to ask, because sometimes your service advisor may or may not know which questions to ask unless they've already been a mechanic long enough. This one friend of mine said that every parts man should have been a mechanic for 5 years before they stepped behind the parts counter. I thought that was interesting. That was just that guy Mike that I worked with. 1998 Ford Taurus, 88,300 some odd miles, and the car wasn't all that old then, but it was pretty old. 3-liter engine, and wipers, fuel gauge, power windows were inoperative, and the power steering feels stiff. All of this stuff. And this, the reason I'm talking about this being a gas station mechanic, I worked at a filling station when I was just out of high school, and I've talked about that before on here. And we could do anything they wanted done, from tag lights to engine overhauls. We didn't do a lot of transmission work, but we put clutches in, we did brakes and all that. But even the simplest jobs can turn into a nightmare today. And back in those days, since a lot of the time it didn't pay all that well to be a filling station mechanic, there was a lot of people that were just, these youngsters were hired, and I was a youngster then too. I rebuilt my first engine working at that gas station by myself, on like a 61 Ford pickup. It was a straight 6 anyway. But one way or another, all you got to do is make one wrong move on a lot of these vehicles today, and you're in big trouble, And this is actually an older vehicle I'm talking about, but it had computers and stuff on it. Now, when we got a car that with multiple problems that happened right after repair, it's natural to assume the problems are caused by whatever was done. Customers draw that conclusion repeatedly, and I've talked before about how my sister, her dad put brakes on her car and her radio quit working. It had nothing to do with it. But that logic seems sound if they can get the shop to absorb the expense. A lot of times they're just wanting to not have to pay for something. And sometimes they'll come and they'll have a problem they knew they had before, and they'll come to you and they'll say, well, I'm having this problem since you did this. This one guy brought his Ford Ranger to me for a tune-up, and I tuned it up. He didn't say what was going on, he just wanted a tune-up, so I tuned it up. Then he comes back and says, well, after you tuned it up, I'm having this trouble. And it turned out it had a cold stumble because of valve carbon deposits, because it had belonged to a security guard that had driven it 200 yards and switched it off repeatedly back when there was a lot of olefins in the gas. And when I realized that was the same truck, I called the guy down about it. I said, you had this problem when you came in here, and you came in here and you wanted us to tune it up so you could try to hang this on us. Now, we'll fix this, but our tune-up didn't cause this. And he just kind of turned red and left, and I never saw him again. The battery had been replaced in his Taurus at a gas station right up the road from the school, and it was after that repair these problems came about. So this was going to be an adventure, right? The Taurus didn't have any running problems, just a list of inoperative systems: wipers, windows, variable assist steering, and fuel gauge. Now, your variable assist power steering gives you more steering assist in a parking lot than it does on the road. And when the variable assist power steering goes belly up or something goes wrong with it, sometimes it will either default to the harder steering or the easier steering. It depends, and this is the way it is even on different Fords. Some of them, as I remember, the Crown Victorias, whenever their variable assist power steering messes up, it's too easy to steer all the time and it feels squirrely on the road. But on this Taurus, when the variable assist power steering went belly up, it was difficult to drive in the parking lot. So anyway, and so this was the systems that were inoperative. Now, we didn't want to jump to conclusions. You know, I've actually jumped to conclusions before I got myself in trouble and gone off on a tangent, and I said, you know, we need to methodically track this stuff down, you know, keeping in mind that you know, there was a repair that seemed to have launched the whole problems, and they didn't have any access to grind as far as, you know, putting this on us, because we didn't actually do the original work. It was done somewhere else when they put the battery in there. First thing we did was search for common links between the failed components and systems. That's always what I taught my students to do. It's always what I did. Common connectors, common powers, common ground. I mean, everything that's common to this. You know, sometimes you got to look at the schematic for a while and figure all that out. But if you find one, like for example, there was this Mustang one time it came from the factory with 2 amplifiers, and one whole side of the sound system didn't work. And so when I got to investigate, it had the 2 amplifiers and the 2 amplifiers each had a separate ground, and the ground was loose on the one amplifier. That's all that was wrong with that. Now that was not exactly what I was talking about, but if you find this, that there's a common connector that feeds a lot of stuff, you know, you can start looking there. The wiper motor, G104, is on the left front inner fender near the air cleaner. G101 grounds the fuel gauge, is near the battery on the left fender, which is close to the other one. The power window switch ground is behind the left kick panel. And so I'm saying, okay, I don't really see anything common denominator here. Now look, here's some locations here. Now you notice both of these grounds are close to the battery right here, which was kind of interesting, since the battery replacement, you know, was what seemed to have launched this. They're only a few inches from each other, and you know, that's this ground and that ground right there. And then of course ground G201, you know, for your power windows is, you know, this is the open door and it is behind the kick panel right there. Okay, so here we kind of track that down. The accessory delay relay, though, now that's a sort of a commonality for the power windows. All of the power windows, you know, get their power from the accessory delay relay. That's the one where you switch the vehicle off, and if you haven't opened the door yet, your accessories are still powered up. You know, your windows and your radio and all that. Incidentally, GM calls that retained accessory power. And they had a module that did that, and it was called a route module. Well, on a Ford, a route module was remote anti-theft personality. So if you had a route module from a Ford and a route module for a GM, they did 2 different things entirely. And that can be confusing if you're used to working on one and then you run into something on the other. But that accessory delay relay, I said, well, let's just do this. Let's physically find the relays. All right, we found the accessory delay relay. It's right here. And of course, there's your rear defrost, battery saver, driver door unlock, interior lamp, 1 touch down. This one will shut off the power to the lights. My Explorer's got a smart junction box, a 2006, and it's got functions I didn't even know it had when I parked out there on a foggy day or a rainy day or something at the college, and I realized that my lights had been left on, or somebody told me they'd been left on. Didn't tell me about it until sometime later. And at lunch I went out there and I said, oh, fiddlesticks, the lights are not burning anymore, and I probably killed my battery and all. Look, the switch was still on the lights, but as soon as I switched on the key, the lights came on, because the smart junction box had timed out and turned the lights off to save me from my own stupidity of running the battery down by leaving the lights on. So I said, I'm going to get this accessory delay relay here, and let's go ahead and unplug that thing, and we're going to jumper this with a jumper. We jumped it. Whoop, we jumped it. And the power windows came online. Hey, suddenly we got power windows. Well, you can't just bypass this relay, because it's just not a good idea. You know, let's go ahead and leave this thing alone, put the relay back in there, and find out why the relay is not working. So the first thing I noticed when I went walking through the wire map is that G101 and G201 are basically, they feed the generic electronic module, and that's responsible for wipers, variable assist power steering, and operation of the accessory delay relay, which kept the power windows up. So all of these were down, right? The variable assist power steering was down and had defaulted to high steering effort. I talked about that earlier. I said this is a sort of a common link right here between at least some of these problems, right? All right, so this generic electronic module, see, that same ground feeds all these other ones, see? So it feeds the PCM. Well, that's an alternate current path there, depending on what motor you got. And remote climate control module, passive anti-theft, remote anti-theft. See, even in '98, this stuff was somewhat complicated. They didn't have a lot of networking going on except between the ABS, when sometimes it would pick up the vehicle speed and send it over to the PCM and all that kind of stuff using a wheel speed sensor. And here's G201. See, it's also feeding the generic electronic module, but that ground also feeds all these other ones. So all of this other stuff, there was no reason to suspect there was anything going on here. The power mirror still worked. Now the master window switch used this same ground too, but the windows wouldn't work unless you bypass the accessory delay relay. So anyway, we're going to move on here. The GEM module, as this is a complicated box really, and they first came out with this in 1995 on some of the Winstars, and it would do funky, crazy stuff. It was some of them. A lesser version of it was called a central timer module. Rangers had it. And on the Windstar, one of the things they were touting about, so it was so wonderful about it, was when you turned on your intermittent wipers, it was paying attention to vehicle speed, and it would, if you were going faster, it would shorten the interval between each wiper wipe. You can read all this material right there. I'm not going to, read everything that's on this slide, but you can see it anyway, and pause the slide and read it if you want to. The GEM is not really a body computer, but it's close. The Taurus received its own GEM in 1996, the F-Series pickup. The Expedition got them in 1997. Both of them were riding piggyback on the interior fuse panel. And these things are really wacky because they got to be the right one. I had one I did a while back on a F-150 that we were trying to find if you go looking for a salvage yard GEM module to go on whatever vehicle, if it doesn't have exactly the right part number and it's not exactly for the same year model and all that, then you're going to have things that just don't work right and serious stuff. Crown Victorias and Lincolns have a lighting control module. It's like the electronics on those were designed by a totally different crew of engineers. The lighting control module is above your right shin. See where the data link connector is? That's where that lighting control module is. The connectors plug in back here. We had to replace a few of those. And that's a strange box in and of itself, but it's a lot different from this. But anyway, so both of them, these plug into the back of the junction box. Now Rangers and Explorers after 1998, and I found this out when I replaced one without without programs. You're supposed to take the data from the old controller, if it'll talk, and dump it in the new one, which I didn't do that on one Ranger that I worked on that when they first started doing this. And I noticed as I was driving out of the shop, my speedometer went up to like 80 miles an hour when I was only barely creeping along, and I realized I had missed a step on the, it was like from one year to the next they changed this. The NGS is this tool here. I always really liked this tool. I knew some mechanics that actually bought this for themselves. It cost a couple of $1,000s when I bought this one here. The college paid for it, but I mean, I decided to buy it. Now, print the connector pinouts and the schematic for the 3 accessible GEM module connectors, which were pretty easy to get to. I found all the fuses feeding the GEM were good, and the powers and grounds were present everywhere they were supposed to be. That's a good thing to check. Powers and grounds, everywhere there's supposed to be a ground, you need to check and see if there's a ground, and you need to check it with a test light that will pull a little bit of a load. Now, a regular test light pulls about 1/4 of an amp. It's not going to burn anything up, okay? So if you've got this module unplugged and you're basically checking powers and ground, you can use a logic probe if you want to, But a logic probe is only going to tell you there's voltage there. It's not going to tell you there's current there. You know, those, I've got one of those probes that will tell you how many voltage, and it volts there, and it's got a little switch on it, you know, that little, forget the name of it, but I've got one that I carry around with me in my truck, you know, that I bought at the pawn shop, brand new. Somebody bought it and didn't know what to do with it and pawned it, you know. But anyway, these three connectors here, I looked them over really good and made sure that the pin fit was good and that you had power and ground everywhere you're supposed to have power and ground, and we did. So that was good. Now, working our way through the NGS to menus to the GEM diagnostic test, we found an unresponsive module. We basically went to the GEM module here, and then we went to diagnostic test modes, and it couldn't talk. Key was on, couldn't talk. Interesting thing about testing the GEM module, if you run the GEM module through its self-test, it's really fun to watch. It'll move the wipers one time, it'll run the driver's window down about halfway one time, and do a bunch of other stuff that'll make funky little noises and turn lights and stuff. See, anything that's timed, whether it's a seatbelt light or whatever, basically gets its marching orders from the GEM module. It's like a timer module that can do a whole lot of different stuff, you know. Well, the communication wire, the blue-white data link connector bus wire, had good continuity all the way from the GEM to the DLC number 7 pin, and the remaining inaccessible module connector is a direct plug-in. It's the one I showed you earlier. It plugs right into the back of the instrument, I mean to the junction box, and there, you really can't get to that one because it's basically buried in there. So, but anyway, that's where we were here. So the big picture was the power windows wouldn't work because the GEM couldn't energize the accessory delay relay. The wipers wouldn't work because they depend on the GEM to fire up their relays. The data link communication problem appeared to be another symptom of a GEM module that had either died of natural causes or had been murdered, but the fuel gauge problem was totally separate and apart from the GEM module, and it was on the blink too. It was reading past full. Alright, so put the GEM module on it, communication returned, the power windows and wipers were restored, the steering normalized, but the fuel gauge was still reading past full. Okay, so we needed to do something with that. If you disconnect the fuel gauge on one of these Fords, the fuel gauge will go past full. If you short the wire out, you know, if this yellow white wire, you gotta find the right one, you short this thing to ground, this gauge is supposed to go all the way down. So when it's disconnected, it goes all the way up. And unlike your temperature gauge, like if you short the temperature gauge goes all the way to hot. Fuel gauge is opposite. You disconnect these connectors back there at the pump, you reach up in there and get those disconnected, or you know, or if a rat chews this yellow wire with a white stripe, then that thing's going to go past full. And that's what this one was doing. So this one here was, alright, so this little anti-slosh module, it was really interesting how people, how the automaker went with this anti-slosh thing. I was riding one time in the back seat of a 442 72 model that this big old rough football player guy had. He was sitting next to his girlfriend, and a bunch of people packed up in the car. There must have been 6 or 7 of us in there. And I could tilt my head and see the gas gauge. It was a big old round gauge on that Oldsmobile on the left side there. And that one didn't have any kind of a slosh dampening, and that needle would move back and forth, right? Whenever he was turning around, going around curves and all that. And one day they was coming up behind another car, and it was a fairly open stretch of road in front of that, you know, out there, no cars coming, and he liked to just really coon dog his 442. And he looked at his girlfriend, and she shook her head, and he nodded his head, and so she covered up her ears, and he floored it and threw us all back against the seat like he was making a jump to light speed. I was watching that gas gauge, and it smacked all the way down on that bottom peg when he accelerated. And whenever he let off and even to back out, the gas gauge came back up, but not quite as far as it had been before. I still remember that to this day. It was really funny. Some of your vehicle, like the Eagle Premier, they actually made a dampened fuel tank sender that wouldn't move but just so fast. That's the way they handle theirs. Well, Ford put this little slosh module in, and it basically plugs into the back of the instrument cluster. You know, and these are little contacts that go to the, you know, that printed circuit, and what's going through the fuel gauge sender sends a signal through this to the gauge so that the gauge doesn't move around a lot, right? Now something's going on with my Explorer right now, and I don't think it's enough of a problem for me to spend a lot of time tinkering with. But I notice whenever it's down on, let's say it's down on 3/4 of the tank, and I decide I'm going to top it up, I go ahead and pump it full of gas, but when I get back in there, the gauge is still reading 3/4 of the tank. But after I drive it a little bit, and after I switch it off and restart it a little bit, a few times, it goes back up to full, which is very interesting to me. And I don't exactly know what's causing that, but I'm just, I could spend time piddling with it, but I said, as long as I know it's okay, I'm just not going to worry about it a whole lot. Something else my Explorer's doing is you have to switch it on after you drive it and you park it hot. If you don't switch it on, it doesn't hold fuel pressure whenever the engine shuts down. Whenever it's hot, it gets some air in the fuel rail. And so I have to switch the key on about 3 or 4 times before it'll start right up. If I don't, it'll spin and start hard. I'm not going to fool putting a fuel pump in there for that, because that's what's going on anyway. So the slosh module and the gauge come together in the same box. This is the one that we pulled out of there. See how it burnt? It's that little transistor there just scorched that board real good. And with a slosh module and a gauge assembly replaced, the fuel gauge returned to normal. Now the conclusion is, appears somebody had connected a pair of jumper cables or the new battery backwards and fried these solid state parts. Now I can't really blame it on the gas station, although I heard it through the grapevine that they thought that the young guy that was working at the gas station had hooked the battery cables up backwards for some reason. Now it could have been that some guy from the parts store sent them a battery that had the posts on the opposite ends of the battery. Have you ever seen that? And he hooked them up, without noticing which was positive, which was negative, or somebody could have just crossed up the jumper cables. Now fortunately it didn't destroy the PCM. PCMs are peculiar like that. I worked on it was a early 80s, like a 84, 85 little marquee or little LTD one time. Lightning had hit the antenna and vaporized the antenna. I ain't kidding you. You could see molecular metal stuff on the windshield where that antenna had just turned into vapor or whatever. It destroyed the engine controller, but it didn't hurt the radio. So you don't ever know what's going to happen there. Now, whenever you're troubleshooting multiple system failures, look for common powers and grounds. Know how to read wiring schematics, because you can wing your way into a black hole. I've seen guys do this, just start throwing parts at it. Well, you can get in big trouble like that. Understand the systems and analyze the data. Don't be lazy. Don't be inept. Take the concern seriously and repair the concern surgically. A surgical repair is a lot more impressive than somebody can take the car apart and put it back together from one end to another. And so basically, somebody used to say something about that, and I say, I'm more impressed with the guy that knows exactly what little thing to do to fix something, where some people used to come in there and they'd complain, well, whenever I bought this thing, the sticker on the door said I was supposed to get 22 miles to the gallon. I'm only getting 20, and I want you to do something about that. There's no screw you can tighten to fix that. But if you know exactly where to go to fix the, tighten the ground or go right to where the problem is, and you know how to find out where the problem is that way. If you've seen it before, that's one thing, but if you've never seen it before and it's a learning thing like this was, I never saw a situation exactly like this before or since, but it was good for the students because we tracked it together, see, and they had an understanding of that. This vehicle belonged to the diesel instructor, and he was over in the Middle East at the time with the Coast Guard, and so he was really appreciative. It was his wife's car, and he wasn't there, and so she brought it over there for us to look at after this problem took place. Well, I'm done at just before the 25-minute mark, and I hope you guys really have a great day, and share this with your friends. Tell me what you think about it. I'll see you next time.